In this lesson, we'll be taking a look at a 3-bet pot played between the small blind and the hijack. Hero, who is in the small blind, is dealt ace-king of clubs. The hijack opens to 2 big blinds. It folds around to the small blind, who 3-bets to 9.5 big blinds. The hijack calls. The flop is the ace of spades, 9 of spades, 2 of diamonds. Hero in the small blind bets out at 5 big blinds for a quarter pot bet. The hijack calls. On the 5 of club turn, both players check through. We finally get the river, which is the 6 of spades. Hero checks with their top pair, top kicker. The hijack bets half pot for 15 big blinds, and Hero jams all in for the remaining 86.5 big blind stack. The hijack calls and shows ace-jack of hearts. We'll analyze this hand history using our Preflop range viewer, which is freely available on the Zenith Poker website just by signing up. And then we'll take a look at postflop using our pre-solved postflop simulations. Taking a look at preflop, the hijack opens a total of around 23% of hands, using a variety of sizes, but most commonly around 2 big blinds to 2.25 big blinds. After the hijack opens, the cutoff continues 11.5% of the time, mostly as a 3-bet, folding to the button, who continues a little more than 15% of the time, often as a split between a call and a 3-bet. And now around to the small blind, who continues 13.5% of the time, split between a polar 3-betting range and a merged calling range. Taking a look at the 3-bet range itself, we'll see that queens through aces, ace-king, and ace-queen suited make up the value component of this 3-bet range. And then many other hands are used as bluffs and semi-bluffs. These wheel aces are being used as a 3-bet bluff. Some of these suited connectors, such as 10-9 suited, 7-6, and 6-5 suited, are also being used as a bluff. Semi-bluffs, these pocket pairs, these Broadway suited hands, and these stronger offsuit Broadway hands. Pocket jacks is somewhere in between value and a bluff. We'll see that its calling EV is quite high at 1.04 big blinds, and it is indifferent between calling and 3-betting. Once the small blind does decide to 3-bet, they need to make a choice about what size. Here there's a couple sizes that are used most frequently, this 9.5 big blinds and this 10.75 big blinds. But a bet size between 8 and 12, even up to 13, is a reasonable option here for the small blind. Note that these slightly bigger sizes will favor the ace-king offsuit. The ace-king suited, as in the hand, is taken most often for this 9.5 big blind size. So somewhere between 9 and 10 big blinds is a reasonable play for this ace-king suited. Against this 3-bet, the big blind in the middle between the small blind and the hijack can continue. In this simulation, there is no calling range in the model. So here the big blind is playing 4-bet or fold. We take a look at the range, it's roughly 4%, very strong. Queens, ace-king, and ace-queen suited, which was the value component of the small blind's 3-bet range, is now continuing in the 4-bet range at full frequency. The other hands are indifferent and make up the bluffing component. Big blind folds. We get the hijack's strategy here. The hijack is going for a 61% folding frequency. The remaining hands split between calling and 4-betting. 26% of the hands call, and the remaining 13% of the hands go for the 4-bet. The hands in the 4-betting range for value, kings, aces, and ace-king suited, a very tight value range. And there are other hands as bluffs and semi-bluffs, the wheel aces, ace-5, ace-4, King Jack, King 10 suited, Ace Queen offsuit. Here, Ace King offsuit is somewhere between a value 4-bet and a call with a very high calling EV. Similarly, pocket queens can go for some value, but much prefers to call and play that 3-bet pot in position. The calling range, as we can see, consists of mainly the larger pocket pairs, 10s through queens, and the larger suited connected hands, Ace Queen suited through Ace 10 suited, King Queen suited through King 10 suited, Ace King offsuit, all at full frequencies, and then other hands are indifferent between calling and folding, which flesh out the range and allow for more playability post-flop. We'll take a quick look at the 4-betting strategy just to round out pre-flop. Here, the 4-bet size is roughly around 20 big blinds against this 19.5 big blind 4-bet size. The small blind most often continues as a 5-bet, but has a roughly 24.5% calling frequency. These pocket pairs make it into the calling range. Jacks and queens, as well as Ace Queen through Ace 10 suited, full frequency continues. The jamming range mostly consists of pocket kings and Ace King. There's a little bit of pocket queens in there, and pocket queens is indifferent. The pocket aces itself goes for a small 5-bet. It's incredibly polar. The 5-betting range is aces for value and other hands as bluffs or semi-bluffs. Here, the Ace King suited is a semi-bluff. They'll get shoved into at a very high frequency, but when they do face a call, they'll have a reasonable equity against the calling hands. Moving on to the flop. The small blind on this Ace 9-2 flop has a 53.4% equity. Be out of the 20 big blind pot of 9.8. In this simulation, the pot of 20 has reached the rake cap. So this pot of 20 is really a pot of 19 with one big blind raked off. We'll take a look at how the ranges compare. The small blind has a 33% density in Ace X holdings, and the hijack has a 27.5% density in top pair. Pocket pairs below top pair, roughly the same for both players, 20.7% for the small blind, 22.5% for the hijack. And if we note that the weaker pairs and unmade hands, slightly weaker on the bottom end for the small blind, although both players have a large chunk of weaker holdings. So both ranges are fairly similar. The hijack itself has a somewhat polar range, mostly of the Ace X holdings, and then the equity drops off significantly in hands weaker than Ace X. Given the fact that top pair blocks other top pair combinations, it's important to note that betting too often with a middling top pair will simply run into your opponent's top pair by the time you reach the river. The exception of this, of course, is Ace King. Going back to the flop strategy, we'll see that there's a few bet sizes that the small blind can implement. Most frequently is this very small bet size of 10%. This 10% bet size is fairly dense in the top pair holdings, particularly the middling and weaker top pair holdings, and also the larger pocket pairs for very thin value and blocking effects. A hand like pocket kings can get value from pocket queens through 10s and pocket 8s, those sorts of hands, and is reasonably well protected by the stronger Ace X combinations. It'll see a turn and then hopefully get to showdown. Going for a bit larger, we note that the density of top pair increases relative to the middling pocket pairs, and then this 50% bet size is much more dense in specifically Ace King, with a top pair density of 40.4%, with the bulk of that being Ace King itself. So this half pot bet size is the most polar, with Ace King aiming for betting of 3 streets and then going all in. We'll take a quick look at that. Half pot bet, there's no raises, calling range, top pair, snapping it off, and the other hands are indifferent. Following the same run out, 5 of clubs, Note that here on the turn, ace king, betting for 3/4 pot at very high frequency, call 6 of spades, and now ace king goes all in on the river, or for a 25% bet size. This line is a very aggressive line and gets a good chunk of the money in. So it doesn't get jammed on after this 25% size. It's indifferent between calling and folding. If we get, say, an offsuit 6 instead, 6 of diamonds, ace king simply rips it in for value. The small blind in this hand bet this 1/4 pot size with the ace king suited, which is a reasonable play. 1/4 pot. The hijack continues, folding roughly at alpha. All the top pair continues, and most of the pocket pairs will continue as well. Pocket queens, which blocks ace queen, is a very easy continue. Pocket jacks and tens, these hands are indifferent because they block some of these bluffs with the queen jack, queen 10, jack 10. Moving on to the turn, the 5 of clubs comes through, and now the small blind has a decision. The betting range is a fairly substantial split between the two sizes, a full pot size bet and the 25% bet. This 25% bet consists of the sort of weaker top pair holdings and going for a block bet. If it gets raised, simply some of the top pairs will be indifferent and ace king will continue. And then the pot size bet consists mostly of ace king or stronger for value, a little bit of ace queen in there, and is incredibly polar. Roughly 50% of this range is value and the remainder is bluffs. Got ace king, 2 pair, ace 5, ace 9, and 3 of a kind, pocket 9s, pocket 5s being the value component. Pot size bet, call, see the river, and rip it in or bet for a reasonable size. Here, this ace king goes for the half pot size. Almost all in, but not quite. The remaining hands just rip it in for value. In the hand as played, hero decides to check the ace king, which is a reasonable play. Small blind will check at high frequency on this brick turn in attempts to get to showdown with these middling hands which bet the flop, namely these more weaker top pair holdings and these pocket pairs, 10s through kings, which have a substantial amount of showdown value if it checks through. Hero in the small blind checks. The hijack makes a decision. They're going to be betting the stronger top pairs, ace queen and ace king for value, and hands stronger than that, going for a 75% bet size. Once again, their weaker top pairs and their pocket pairs will also check back and try to get a showdown. Both players check through this turn. However, if hijack was to bet 75%, hero in the small blind will be using their ace king and stronger hands, this 2 pair, the pocket aces, as traps to protect the remaining top pair. Notice against this bet, all these pocket pairs simply fold out, pocket kings being indifferent because it blocks the ace king value component of the hijack's range, making it to the same river after the call. Face a check and then all in. These top pairs are indifferent, mainly this ace queen, ace king can go for a call, and then the remaining hands are very happy to snap it off. Pocket aces is the set. So if it checks through on the turn and we get the 6 of spades, once again the small blind needs to make a decision about what to do. Small blind, after it checks through, has a range which consists of mostly of top pair and then these weaker pocket pairs, both of which want to get to showdown. The top pair themselves can get a little bit of value by betting for this 1/4 pot size against the pocket pairs in the hijack's range. This block bet also sort of prevents these stronger top pairs, ace jack and ace queen, from betting into the ace 4, ace 3, ace jack and ace 10. If the small blind was instead to check, those hands would simply bet, and then ace 4 and ace 5 would still easily call because of their blockers, but they've missed out the value that they could have got against the hijacks, pocket pairs, queens through 10s. Pocket 10s through pocket kings from the small blind often will check, with the exception of some of these pocket kings with a spade, which for the same reason can get value from pocket queens through 10s in the hijack's range. and also block some of these flushes with this king jack and king queen, as well as blocking ace king. If the small blind does decide to check, the hijack will simply just bet many of their top pairs for value. The ace jack and ace 10 are indifferent between betting and checking back. Ace king goes for a bigger bet, for around pot-sized bet. Ace queen is somewhere in the middle. Ace 10 and ace jack go for this half pot bet if they do decide to bet. Against a half pot bet, the jamming range out of the small blind is around 9%, mostly ace king for value. Any remaining flushes, of course, will rip it all in. And now we note that this pocket kings is the bluffing hand. This hand is indifferent between calling, jamming, and folding. Pocket kings with a spade blocks the ace king, which is the main hand that will always call, as well as the king queen and king jack flushes. Ace queen is indifferent between calling and folding. Therefore, pocket queens doesn't really want to make it into the jamming range because it blocks and folds in the hijack's range. Against the all-in, the hijack's ace jack suited needs to make a decision between calling and folding. Here is indifferent. However, exploitatively, if the hijack thinks that the small blind is overbluffing with this all-in, then it would be a reasonable call. Given the fact that this jamming range is very narrow, with mostly ace king for value, and a variety of possible bluffs which the small blind can choose from, it could be a reasonable exploitative call. Conversely, the decision to check ace king itself on this river needs to be a carefully considered exploit from the small blind's point of view. If the small blind thinks that after their check, the hijack will bet at a high frequency, namely at a high frequency with their ace-x combinations, say for example, this ace-jack and ace-10 betting at full frequency rather than being indifferent, then it makes much more sense for hero in the small blind to actually check the ace-king as a trap. Let's take a look at some of the node locks to show you the possible exploits. Check will change the small blind's range here to be betting most of this ace jack and ace 10 alongside some additional bluffs. And now we'll run the river again. We'll find here that the small blind suddenly decides to check everything. After the check, facing this half pot bet, ace queen and ace king just rip it all in for value. Now say for example, against this half pot bet, if the small blind was to check raise all in with only slightly more bluffs, say for example these king queens, then the hijack will bet all of their top pairs for this half pot size and then snap call the all in, getting slightly more value from those higher frequency bluffs. And conversely, if we lock the small blind to bet all of their ace king, and now we run the river, we'll see that the hijack themselves will bet all of their top pairs and simply just jam all their flushes and stronger hands. This bet size will also increase, this 3/4 pot, simply because there's not enough strong hands to trap to prevent the bet size from being slightly bigger. And all the top pairs, ace jack and ace 10, will be betting at full frequency, not being particularly scared of that many holdings. Of course, if there is an all-in, they'll be indifferent. So with this hand history, we've taken a look at this 3-bet pot, in particular, a handful of river lines and the associated exploits that both players can make against the other player's possible deviations. We've analyzed preflop using the Zenith Poker preflop range viewer, and then postflop using pre-solved ranges in GTO Plus. I hope you learned something from this lesson. And if you like videos like this, please leave a like or subscribe to the channel.